I first heard about the Witcher Saga through the video game franchise. I haven't actually played the games yet, but I heard they were based on this book saga from Polish author Andrzej Sapkowski. I always intended to play the games when I got a chance, but I knew I wanted to read the books first, as any good fantasy book nerd should. Well, I put that off for a while, and months eventually turned into years. Then the Netflix series came out specifically following the storyline from the books. So I finally decided to take the plunge and read the books, and let me tell you, I'm still kicking myself for waiting this long. The Witcher Saga is very difficult to encapsulate in a single review, and Sapkowski's unique style of storytelling doesn't make it any easier, but I shall press on and do my best anyway. Character. The characters of the Witcher Saga are arguably the best part of the story as a whole. Sapkowski decided to focus on characters and their relationship over plot and other important aspects, but that's not to say he did so to the detriment to the other parts of the story. He just gave special attention and focus to these characters and their relationships with one another. Geralt is probably one of the most recognizable fantasy protagonists of the modern age. And while that's in large part thanks to the success of the games, anyone who has read the books can agree that his personality is just as strong in the books as it is in the games. Geralt is a witcher, a monster slayer who is also part of a dying breed. Magic and monsters are slowly dying in this world, and Geralt finds himself dealing less and less with monsters and more with people. He's a killing machine who's finally learning to feel and care for others. This interesting dynamic is what immediately pulled me to him as a character. Then we have Yennefer, his love interest and the other major character of the story. Yennefer is a sorceress and an extremely proud and powerful woman. She's led her life manipulating and controlling people and forces around her. But in Geralt, she's found a force she cannot control. Her entanglement with him is what sets her on a path wholly unfamiliar to her. The third and final main character to the series is Ciri. She's the adoptive daughter to Yennefer and Geralt, and a child of extreme importance. Without going into spoilers, she's the main driving point of action and tension within the plot, but quite against her will. She wants nothing more than to be safe and happy with Geralt and Yennefer, and both of them want the exact same thing. But if things were that simple, this wouldn't really be much of a story now, would it? All the characters in the story are exquisitely written and well realized. Even the supporting cast is filled with a variety of distinct and strong personalities that will leave them burned into your mind for a long time to come. And I feel quite confident when I say that Dandelion is likely one of the best supporting characters in fantasy as a whole. The strong personalities and dynamics between these characters is what makes this series, and it wouldn't be nearly as successful or well known without it. I'd give the characters in this series a solid 8 out of 10. The only reason it's not higher is purely due to some of the limitations in the way Sapkowski tells his story, but it's likely just down to personal taste on that front. Plot. The plot of the saga is a well-written travelogue style journey. It takes you through the countryside and some towns of the continent, and you get to see and meet a very colourful assortment of characters along the way. It does, however, meander a bit at first, and at times it feels like it does go off on unnecessary tangents, but I still enjoyed it as a whole. Now, I will say there is a part of the plot that I enjoyed, but I didn't feel like it quite fit well within the rest of the story. You see, the whole story takes place during a war with the Nilfgaardian Empire. So while our characters often see the repercussions of this war in an interesting and often brutal way, there is a side to it that Sapkowski implemented in a way that I would rather have cut if I were him. He takes us through the politics of this war by giving us insights into war meetings between monarchs and into battles between these opposing forces. He gives us chapters between political figures to show us the behind-the-scenes view of how this war is turning out and the motivations behind the different forces at play. And in a series like, for example, A Song of Ice and Fire, this would have been a great addition. Unfortunately, this story is very character focused and none of our main or even side cast is actually part of these chapters. In fact, none of them even have much of a stake in the war or its outcome. So while these chapters are interesting, they do take away from the actual plot most readers would care about. I have friends who just skipped these chapters as a whole because they didn't care about these chapters at all and just wanted to get back to the main story about their favorite characters. Had Sapkowski maybe integrated the political intrigue more with the characters or given them more of a stake in the outcome of the war, we would likely care more about it. But right now, as it is, it kind of just feels like a part of the books that Sapkowski indulged himself a bit in. He clearly enjoyed writing it, but I think that whoever originally edited his books should have left quite a bit on the cutting room floor. I mean, in the last book, the very climax of our story, there was an entire chapter, a very large chapter I might add, solely dedicated to a battle in this war. No characters we cared about were in this battle or even near it, yet Sapkowski felt the need to dedicate a whole chapter to exactly how the battle went, which side pressed the advantage where, and the battle tactics that were employed with the different formations within the armies involved. And I simply didn't care. This whole chapter could have been either completely axed, reduced to a single sentence, or even to just a short paragraph explaining the results of the battle, and it would have made absolutely no difference to the story. So while the story is well written and the plot we cared about was told in a captivating way, this entire unnecessary part definitely took away quite a bit of the enjoyment. I'd give the plot a 6 out of 10. Like I said, it was well done, but an author needs to know when to add things to a story and when to cut it completely. And if the author doesn't know, the editor really should. Worldbuilding. The worldbuilding of the Witcher Saga is quite a well-executed grimdark twist on traditional fantasy tropes and races. Using traditional fantasy races is something I usually don't enjoy because many authors will often be quite bland in their interpretation or use of these races. Sapkowski, however, uses them in quite an interesting way that doesn't feel tired or overdone. Elves once ruled the land alongside other races like dwarves and gnomes until humans came. But unlike what we've seen in other classical fantasy stories, the relative peaceful departure of these older races doesn't happen. In this story, men are depicted as ruthlessly as we know them in real life. Non-humans are looked down on, oppressed, or even ruthlessly killed in great racial cleansing called pogroms. So instead of these elder races just departing from the land, they are slowly dwindling in number and hoping for a way to escape. Along with that, we see monsters and beasts that can kill and decimate towns with ease. The whole world is darker and bloodier than the traditional fantasy setting, but in a way that feels absolutely believable and real. Humans dislike non-humans, so they persecute and push them to the dregs of society. Monsters kill humans, so they develop monster hunters like witches to deal with them. And when humans have problems with each other, they do everything in their power to kill their enemies even if they're humans too. If that doesn't sound like exactly what humans would do in that situation, then I don't know what does. Sapkowski masterfully uses this fantasy world to deliver some scathing commentary on the human condition and race relations. And along with how well the characters integrate into this world, I have to give the world building a solid 7 out of 10. Magic. The Witcher Saga uses a very soft magic system that doesn't really take much of a primary role in the story. And if you don't recall the difference between a hard and soft magic system, allow me to remind you. There are generally 2 methods one can go about creating magic systems for your fantasy novel. Either a hard or a soft system. Now it is on a sliding scale and not always 100% on the hard or soft sides respectively, but it helps to differentiate the different approaches. A soft magic system is a system of magic that has very few, if any, rules associated with its use. The magic is usually mysterious, mystical, and often forms more part of the background than the foreground. For examples, look at Gandalf in Lord of the Rings. We're never 100% certain exactly what he's capable of, what his limits are, and what the cost is for his use of magic. It's this mysterious, unknown force that the protagonist is woefully ignorant of. This is great for these kinds of stories where magic is more of an added flavor to the world instead of the focus. The Song of Ice and Fire series, on which the television show Game of Thrones is based, also has a very soft magic system, almost to the point of having no magic at all. It uses magic more as this ephemeral part of the world building than anything the characters really interact with. On the opposite side of this magical spectrum, we have hard magic systems. Brandon Sanderson, for example, has built a career on writing books with very hard magic systems. These magic systems are rigorous, have strong rules, internal logic, and are very much at the forefront of the storytelling. Think of Mistborn for a very clear example of this. Well, Sapkowski's magic system is undoubtedly on the softer side of the spectrum. The magic is this unknown force that sorcerers just barely manage to tame and control. But this isn't a bad thing. The focus in the story isn't on the magic, but the magic does add a very key aspect of world building and flavor to the story. Magic is active in the world, but in the story it is often mysterious and mystical. I actually prefer the way Sapkowski did the soft system in the story over the way other authors have done. He does it in a way that the world still feels magical, but it's not something the readers or the characters need to comprehend. They just need to accept that magic is an active force here, and because of that, things can happen that you might not expect. And I don't recall Sapkowski even once actually using the magic system as a deus ex machina for any problems that the characters have. Overall, I'd give the magic system in the Witcher Saga a 7 out of 10. A solid score for a solid soft magic system. And yes, the irony of saying a solid soft magic system is not lost on me. Structure. The structure of how the whole saga is set up is something I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with. Don't get me wrong, it's overall very well done, but there are parts of it that really grate on me, as I've explained earlier. The prose is something I immensely enjoyed. Sapkowski has this way of writing that feels kind of like an old uncle telling you a story. If Tolkien is the grandpa of fantasy telling you a story before bed when you were a child, then Sapkowski is the uncle telling you a story over your first bottle of beer around a campfire as a teenager. Still a very strong authorial voice and very much in the same vein as Tolkien in the storytelling aspect, but it has a darkness that only Sapkowski knows how to make real. So it's safe to say that I love the prose. It's one of the best aspects to the books I've found, and whenever I jump into the next book in the series, I found it instantly welcoming and enjoyable. The pacing, however, is a different story. Like I've said before, Sapkowski will dedicate large chunks of time to completely unnecessary politically focused chapters. And if it's not the political intrigue, it's the battles. If he had made these things important to the actual plot concerning our primary team of characters, I may have enjoyed these more. But they felt more like deviations and distractions from the actual story than anything else. And on top of that, even the main story with our protagonists often took meandering turns that felt quite unnecessary. Not as often as the political chapters, but it happened enough to be notable. The story as a whole fits together well, and the only real criticisms I have are what I've already talked about, so I'd like to give the structure a score of 7 out of 10. The prose really carries it here, but the pacing is a real detriment to the actual story in my opinion. However, if you're able to overlook it, this is definitely a book series you can enjoy. The Witcher Saga is a series I thoroughly enjoyed, even despite the issues I had with the books. I still look forward to the next installment when I finish the book, and it's still a series I'd reread in future. If you like strong characters, dark fantasy world with an unflattering critique of the human condition, monsters and mystical magic, then this series is definitely for you. Overall, I'd give the Witcher Saga a 7 out of 10. Definitely one of the better series I've read, and I'd recommend it to anyone who's thought of giving it a try. And now that I've finished it, I can actually go and play the game, so I'm definitely gonna go do that. But as always, those are just my opinions. What did you think of the Witcher Saga? Let me know in the comments below. But thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.